Reviewing running shoes here on YouTube, or really any media outlet, is not really an exact science. It can be very subjective. And I'm constantly asked in the comments for my reviews, what do I mean by this word or that word? And I see that in other people's videos as well. So what I did is I went through some of my older reviews and some other people's reviews and pulled out a handful of words that I think come up over and over. And I thought what I'd do in this video is go through and define definitely what I mean by them, but how I interpret them just sort of across the entire space as to how people use these words and what do they mean when we're all talking about the running shoes that we love. I think the best place to start here is the word that's probably used the most when describing a running shoe, and that's the word soft. And that makes sense because what a running shoe is trying to do is isolate or cushion your foot from the ground. So soft is a very logical descriptor to describe a running shoe. Now, when I'm talking about soft, though, it's got a few levels to it. It's got a few layers to it. The first one that comes to mind is plush. Now, a plush feeling shoe can definitely be the foam. How does that shoe feel when you step into it? Does it welcome your foot? Does it sort of absorb and wrap around your foot? And on that initial foot strike, is there a softness? Is there a plushness in that initial foot strike? It doesn't necessarily need to carry through the entire ride of the shoe, but when you're first contacting the ground or stepping, is it a plush experience? Plush, for me, can also mean the upper. Is the upper a plush experience when you step into the shoe? Are there any snag points? Is it a harsh upper? Is it a strict upper? Or does it wrap around your foot really nice and create a very plush ride? So plush can be a combination of foam and upper. The next one for me would be squishy. Now, squishy doesn't necessarily mean the best things for me. What I'm talking about there is when I'm stepping into that foam, and squishy generally is going to always be the foam in the ride of the shoe. If it just feels like when I step and I impact in that foam, it just sort of squishes out in every direction and doesn't really have any structure to it, that's going to be squishy. It's not always a bad thing, but often it's not a good thing, at least in my lexicon. And the final one in the soft sort of area would be mushy. Now, mushy is probably the one that I dislike the most. Mushy is basically when you step into the foam, you basically sink into the shoe and that's it. Like nothing else happens. Obviously the foam will rebound, but like the foam's not really doing anything. You just step into it and it's just like everything just sort of, it feels like all the foam just goes every direction and that's it. It doesn't do anything else. It's probably my least liked feeling in any type of running shoe. Now the next word is firm. It kind of makes sense. It's the opposite of soft. But I think there's a little bit more to firm. So when I'm talking about a firm shoe, it isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can have a firmer foam that has, different properties than a very soft, squishy, or mushy foam. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I tend to actually favor firmer shoes or shoes with a firmer ride. So firm can not just only be the foam, it can be the overall ride. And the ride can be a combination of a bunch of stuff. The foam, is there a plate in it? The geometry, how much rubber is on the outsole. There's a lot of things that go into describing a shoe as firm. It's not just the foam. But when we're talking about foam, again, firm isn't always a bad thing. In fact, in my mind, it's a good thing. Now, going down sort of the levels of firm, you can have harsh. Now, harsh is very subjective because there's some foams out there that, are crowd favorites, but I actually find very harsh to run in. And what I mean by that is they just beat my legs up. They may do their job. They may be everything they need to be as a super foam, but at the end of the day, my feet or my legs just feel completely trashed after I run in that foam. Now, again, maybe not the worst thing, maybe not the end of the world, because if it's a race situation, and I'm only using that harsh foam for a race, but it's giving me everything I need for the race, then it's okay. But that harsh foam, I'm probably never going to train in or train as little as possible in because I just can't recover after using that foam. And then the last sort of firm word that I would use to describe some level of firmness would be rigid. Now, rigid can mean a lot of things in the shoe, and generally this isn't only the foam, and frankly, it's probably not the foam. If there is a carbon fiber plate or some sort of stiffening agent in the shoe, rigid is going to be something that I would describe quite a bit. It can also be something for, I think, more budget level foams. A lot of the budget level trainers of most brands will feel very rigid because the foam that's in that shoe is firm, but it's not really doing anything for you, so the shoe ends up just being really stiff and rigid. Not really the best complement for a running shoe. And then another word that I think can describe both soft and firm would be bouncy. Now you can have a soft or firm foam, and any of the other words I've just described can also feel bouncy. So you can add or combine soft or firm and then all those other descriptors with bouncy. But when I'm talking about bouncy, what I'm really talking about is springiness, or how energetic the shoe feels. Generally, this is going to be the foam in the shoe, but again, something like a carbon fiber plate or rods or a TPU plate can contribute to how bouncy the shoe feels. But more often than not, bouncy is going to be the actual foam itself. The resiliency of the foam, how much energy return the foam actually has. Some foams have a slower return. You sink into them and then they will push back on you, where other foams are, you don't sink into them and they just sort of spring off immediately. Bounce is all sort of things in there. Another word that I would describe bounce with would be compressive. How compressive is the foam? Some foams, like I just said, you sink quite a bit into, but then they push you back out, where other foams, you sink into them, but then they don't do anything. And that's where we get back into mushy over in the soft side. But there can be firmer foams or harsh foams where you can feel a little compression, but then they snap back instantly. So again, it's not necessarily a negative thing. I think bouncy is something that's always going to be used in combination with soft or firm. The next set of words are words that really describe the ride to me. Now, they can build on soft, firm, or bouncy, but now I'm getting into words that I'm really talking about how the shoe rides. So it's not specifically to the foam or to the construction of the shoe, it's just how the shoe rides underfoot. And the first one that I use a lot, and I always get questions as to what do I mean, is it's aggressive. Aggressive. The shoe runs aggressive. Now, this is going to be a combination of a lot of things. Generally, it's going to be the foam, the resiliency of the foam. The resiliency is the energy return of the foam. It's going to be, does it have a stiffening agent like a carbon fiber plate, rods, something like that. That's going to contribute a lot to it. Also, the design of that plate, how much curve is in that plate, things like that. Also, geometry is going to play quite a big role into this. So if you have a heavily rockered shoe, especially in the forefoot, that shoe is going to feel very aggressive. Also, if you have a shoe with a very high drop from heel to toe, that could also feel very aggressive, because what those are going to do is they're going to put you up on your toes. So it's going to feel like the shoe wants you to be on your toes and wants you to be rolling over very fast, very quickly. It's going to feel aggressive. Another word that would fall into aggressive category for me would be pop. Now, that's generally describing the feel of carbon in the shoe, the carbon fiber plate, or the rods. That pop is sort of the end of that aggressive ride. So if you have a very aggressive ride with a high drop, a very rockered forefoot, a very stiff plate, and then when you're toeing off, there's a little extra kind of pop off that toe. That's what I mean by pop. It's sort of the end of the aggressiveness of a shoe. It's that last little note that you feel as you're toeing off. That would be pop. It's part of being an aggressive ride to me. Another word that I use all of the time would be direct. The shoe feels very direct. Now, this could be any number of things. Generally, when I'm using this to describe a shoe, it's going to be a lower stack shoe where I can feel the ground more. I have better ground feel. So I feel like it has a very direct ride because I'm very much on the ground, which is a good thing in most instances to me. Though higher stack shoes with carbon fiber plates can also feel direct sometimes because maybe you're feeling the plate more than the ground, but you're feeling something in the shoe or under the shoe that makes it feel very direct. Now, another word, and I just used it to describe direct, would be connected. That's also a word I would use to describe a direct feeling shoe, traditionally a racing flat. Low stack, not a lot of modern geometry, very kind of flat midsole. When you're on the ground on that shoe, you feel the ground and you feel very connected to it. So when you're pushing off on toe off or when you're striking the ground, you feel everything. You feel connected to what you're running on. And that's a very good feeling, especially in trail running, I think, where you need to understand how much grip that you have. Being connected to the surface is very important. And then another word that I think could work with aggressive or direct would be the word nimble. Now, you could have a very aggressive shoe that, puts you up in your toe, but there's just a lot of shoe there, and it's not necessarily going to feel nimble, where you could have a traditional racing flat that's going to be a very minimal shoe that's going to feel very direct, connected, and very nimble, because wherever you put your foot or however you weight your body or your leg, you're going to really, feel that instantly. So whether that's accelerating or cornering, it's a very nimble feeling shoe. So on the acceleration front for nimble, I would say a shoe that has good turnover or just turnover is going to be something I would extend nimble with. So as I'm picking up pace, can I accelerate? And once I'm accelerating, does it feel like the shoe's getting in the way, or does it feel like it's helping me accelerate and pick up speed? Another word that it would put in the nimble category would be lively. Now, an aggressive shoe that's firm or soft or bouncy, and I think specifically bouncy is something that you would combine with nimble to give you a lively feel. A shoe that's got a very sort of bouncy, compressive foam that's springing you forward, that's aggressive, is going to feel like a very lively ride. And then the last set also describe the ride, but they also, to me, describe how the shoe just feels on the foot. How does it feel to wear the shoe? And the first one that I probably use all of the time here would be stable. Now, stability when you're talking about running shoes means a very specific thing, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you step on the shoe, when you're just wearing it, does it feel like it wants to just sort of roll you all over the place? Or is it something very stable where you feel very planted when you're stepping into it? You feel that the midsole of the shoe or the structure of the shoe is actually supporting you and controlling the movement of where your foot's going. Now, you can have a very high stack shoe with a lot of soft foam. Generally speaking, that's going to feel very unstable or squirrely, and squirrely would be the next word that I would put into this category of stable. Or you could have a very high stack of firmer foam, and that is going to feel very stable. It's going to feel very planted. Now, another word that typically comes out of me when I'm talking about a more stable shoe, because stable shoes tend to have wider platforms, they tend to have more foam in them, is bulky. Bulky is not a good descriptor for me. If a shoe feels bulky, it kind of, even if it is trying to be aggressive, it's trying to be bouncy, it's trying to be lively, all these other words I just talked about in this video, if it's too bulky, all of that stuff is kind of voided, so it just doesn't work. It just feels like a mess. At the same time, you can have a stable shoe that's lower to the ground with a firmer foam that's more direct, that's going to feel more stable because there's less material between you and the road, and that kind of shoe is definitely not going to feel bulky. So again, stable, when I'm talking about a running shoe, is not stability. This is not a stability shoe. It's just about how the shoe feels underfoot. Another word that will definitely describe the ride of the shoe, but also the overall feel of the shoe, would be smooth. Now, in this era of running shoes that we're in early 2024, where we have very high stacks of foam, we end up having a lot of toe rocker especially, but it can also be heel to toe rocker. And that rocker exists because if you have that high stack of foam in the shoe, you need that rocker to help get the shoe up over the toe. If it's not there and you're just running on a ton of foam under the toe, it's going to feel very odd. It's going to be very hard. It's going to feel the opposite of smooth to kind of toe off on. So smooth is really about how well is that rocker working, or how is the geometry of the shoe in combination with the foam and any other tech that's in the shoe, like the plate, the rods, whatever else that would be, how is that actually working to produce a very smooth feeling? If you're heel striking, midfoot striking, or forefoot striking, how smooth does it want to kind of push you forward? How easy is it to toe off? Now, another word that falls into the smooth category but doesn't necessarily only describe the ride of it is compliant. I use this word quite a bit. Generally, I will use this word to describe shoes specifically that don't have a lot of rubber on the outsole. So where you're running more directly on the foam. And what I mean by that is it feels like when you're landing on a shoe that has very little rubber contacting the ground, the foam is sort of pouring into all the little crevices of the asphalt or the concrete, whatever surface you're running on, and it just feels very compliant to the ground. It's a very quiet sounding shoe. If you ever run in a shoe with like a big chunk of rubber, especially in the forefoot, it can feel very kind of slappy. It's making a very specific noise. But a shoe that doesn't have a lot of rubber on the outsole is actually a very quiet shoe, and it feels very compliant to the ground. So if you get that high stack shoe and it tends to be very quiet, so it's very smooth and it feels very compliant, that's sort of the ultimate in a silky smooth ride. And then lastly, a word that kind of builds on smooth would be rolling. And again, especially in this era of high stack, heavily rockered shoes, rolling, I think, is something that we end up talking about a lot. So again, that's when you're rolling forward off the toe, that smooth feeling, does it aid to roll you forward into the next one or roll you forward? So when you're running, over a distance, it just feels like you're kind of constant motion. You're just rolling forward all of the time. And I think the other word that I would put in here would be propulsive. That rolling effect, does it feel propulsive? Is it propelling you forward? And a lot of the modern high stack, heavily rockered shoes, this is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to be smooth, roll you forward, and feel propulsive to propel you forward. You can also get carbon plated shoes that do this. That sort of aggressiveness that I talked about earlier can help be propulsive moving forward. But I think the distinction there is like propulsive more is rolling, it's propelling you forward, where I think when you're talking about an aggressive shoe, you're talking about the extra pop off the toe. Pop and propulsive are a little different to me, which is why I put propulsive more for rolling. Those are some of the main words that I saw come up over and over. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. There's obviously other words that we use to describe these shoes. So let me know in the comments if there are other words that I use or other reviewers use often, and I'll try my best to either explain it in the comments, or I'll just catalog them and I'll make a follow-up video to this at some point to get into more of those words. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this type of content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content like this pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.